Hey everybody, and welcome to our stamp club. We are going to be making a very fun matchbox. It's known in two different ways, but it's a very fun style card. And the way that this works is if you think about a book of matches, you know how you open it up by lifting up one of the pieces. So I'm going to lift up the top and it pops up from a little piece on the side, and then it has a really cute image on the inside. And I've confessed over the last few weeks that I'm not typically a critter person when it comes to making cards, but I'm sorry, I could not resist because there are some super, super cute stamps in the Easter Bunny stamp set. There is a corresponding punch that punches out this shape, but I'm not going to be using that on this card. And sorry to say that the punch is unavailable for a little bit, but this set is available. And there are some really, really sweet sentiments and also some images that are in this set. And we're going to put a matchbook. I guess I'll call it a matchbook. I don't know. You're going to hear me say matchbook, matchbox. Just go with it. I'm going to show you how to make the card. And that's really the primary focus for today. I will do a little bit about how I put the design of the image on the front and on the inside. But the real thing that I want to show you is how to make this card. And I'm going to show you the pieces. So you're going to start with a piece, a quarter sheet of cardstock. And what that means is that you're going to have a piece of cardstock that is going to measure 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I used mint macaron. And the reason I use this color is the designer series paper that I'm going to use is featured in the set of colors that are in that designer series paper. So the card base, and let me just show you, is just one piece of cardstock. The actual card that opens is made from designer series paper. So again, 1/4 sheet, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 is what you're going to need. And then there are some other pieces of cardstock that I used to make the card that I showed you. On the inside, I used a piece of basic white and I cut that to 3 by 4. You're going to have some options, but you may want to start with a 3 by 4, and then you can figure out if you want to do something a little bit different. And then for my focal point on the front, I used a scrap piece of cardstock. And this is petal pink. It's petal pink because, again, if you look at the designer series paper, in that designer series paper, there is some petal pink color. So those are the 3 pieces of cardstock that I chose. Quarter sheet of the mint macaron, 3 by 4 for my basic white, and then a piece of scrap that's going to be big enough for me to do what I want to on that front focal piece. Now let's talk about the designer series paper. And before I show you the measurements for that, I want to show you the designer series paper that I used. And you can see that I've cut this up quite a bit. I have some scraps. This is the Country Gingham. This is in the current mini catalog. And when you figure out what designer series paper you want to use, you are going to need 2 sheets of 6 by 6. And they need to be the same design because we're going to cut these up and they're going to be used on the front and on the back. So I chose a pattern that I liked, and I chose a pattern that is going to be pretty easy to see both vertically and horizontally. Obviously, this pattern doesn't change. The other side is a really nice gingham, and this has the hatches at an angle, a 45-degree angle, but it's a pretty basic pattern. If you choose something that has a design, and you can, make sure that when you cut it, you think about the orientation that the paper is going to go. It's going to be landscape. So if I had a pattern, maybe I have flowers, I'm going to want to cut my paper so the flowers are showing vertically. So just keep that in mind. So 2 pieces of designer series paper, 6 by 6, that are the same. Okay. Now let's talk about how you're going to cut those. And I'm going to address one piece at a time. So what you're going to do is the first thing you're going to do is you're going to cut your piece so that you have 2 pieces. You're going to cut it. It starts as a 6 by 6. You're going to cut it so you have 4 by 6. So you're going to cut that piece of paper at 4. And that will give you one sheet that is 4 by 6. And the other piece is going to be 2 by 6. You're going to want to cut that 2 by 6 into 2 pieces. One is going to be 2 by 4, and the other is going to be 2 by 2. So if I pull this all back together, this started as one sheet that was 6 by 6. The first thing I did is I cut it at 4 inches, and I have 2 pieces. One is 4 by 6, the other is 2 by 6. And then I'm going to take the 2 by 6 and cut that into 2 pieces, 2 by 4 and 2 by 2. The 2 by 2 is extra. You're not going to use that. You can use it in part of your design, but it's not going to be in anything that I've put together. Don't waste it though. Tuck it back in like I did. I'll probably just throw this back into my little scraps for that gingham designer series paper, because I'll come up with another thing that I want to do. But we are definitely going to use this piece, which is 2 by 4. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to cut it into different widths. And we're going to put some on the outside. And we're going to put some on the inside. So that is going to come in handy when we finish the design. Now for this piece where you have your 4 by 6, let's concentrate on that for just a minute. What you're going to do on that is you're going to score that at 5 inches on the 6-inch side. So if I get out my scoring board, I am going to put that in my scoring board on the 6-inch side, and I'm going to score it at 5 inches. Okay. That is going to be part of the matchbook. In fact, that piece, when I score it at it's really going to be 1 inch, a 1-inch score, because it's 6 inches long, and I scored it at the 1 inch. That's going to be this piece when we put the card together. So that's going to be the little piece that gets the tuck in of the card. So that's the first piece of your 6 by 6 and what you're going to do with that. You'll end up with 2 pieces, one that looks like this and one that is 4 by 6. The second piece, you're going to start the same way, meaning if I put all of this back together and ignore those, I'm going to hide those from you for a minute. Ignore what I got up here. The first thing you're going to do is just like you did on that first 6 by 6, is you're going to cut it into 2 pieces. You're going to have one piece that is 4 by 6 and one piece that is 2 by 4. The piece that is 2 by 4 is going to be extra. So you can actually get rid of that if you want to. This piece, this is the one that is 4 by 6. We're going to do 2 things to that. The first is that we are going to cut it into 2 pieces. So we're going to end up with 2 pieces. One is going to be 3/4 of an inch by 4. So what you're going to do is in your paper trimmer, you're going to put this piece into your paper trimmer, and at the 3/4 inch mark, you're going to cut that off. So you're going to have a little piece that is 3/4 of an inch wide and 4 inches high. The second piece is going to be 5 1/4 by 4, because we just took off 3/4 of an inch from 6. So that's going to give us 5 1/4 inches by 4. And what you're going to do on this piece is you're going to score it, and you're going to score it at 4.5 on the 5 1/4 side. So if I put this into my scoring board and I put it in on the 5 1/4 inch side, I'm going to score that at 4.5. So I'm going to recap just to make sure that we all have the same pieces that we're going to need to create the card. And we're going to go back to the pieces that we had in that first 4x6. So you're going to have your 4x6. You're going to score that at the 5-inch mark, and that's going to be one of the pieces that you're going to use to create your card. The other piece that comes from that first piece of 6x6 is the 2x4, and that extra 2x2 you can just get rid of. So from the first piece of your 6x6, you need one that's 4x6 scored at 5 and one that's 2x4. And then for your second piece, you're going to need a piece that is 3/4 by 4, a piece that is 5/4 by 4, and that one's going to be scored at 4.5. All right. So now let's think about how we would take those pieces and create the base for the Matchbox. And let's kind of look at this and how it's constructed. So we've got a long piece of designer series paper, which is actually 2 pieces that are put together, and they come down to an end, and then that end is folded, and that's what captures the top piece when it goes into the matchbook. So what that is going to be is we're going to take the piece that measures, this is the one that measures 6 inches by 4 and has the score at the 5-inch mark. So that's going to be the piece that creates the little lip. And we're going to take the other piece that we had that is 5 1/4 inches long, and it's scored at 4.5. And we are going to put these 2 pieces together. Okay, so here's how we're going to do that. We want to have the same pattern on the inside of the card. So I've aligned these. The one I have on the left is the one that is 5 1/4 inches long, scored at 4.5. The one I have on the right is the one that is 6 inches long, 4 inches wide, and scored at 5 inches. And what I want to do is I want to put these together so they're acting like one sheet of paper. And the way I'm going to do that is I am going to use this space, which is 3/4 of an inch wide, and I'm going to adhere these pieces together. So I'm just going to grab some of my liquid glue, and I'm going to put the glue on this piece because that is where I'm going to be attaching my other piece. So I'm going to put a little bit of glue on here. I don't want to get it super heavy, but I want to make sure that there's glue all up and down. And then I'm going to take this piece. I'm going to make sure that I have my pattern, meaning I have my green against my green. And I'm just going to adhere those two together. And I'm going to end up with a long sheet that looks pretty continuous. And over here is where I have that 1 inch score line. Now, what you're going to notice is if I bring back the example, that flap is this flap, but it looks a little different. And we're gonna make it look the same. We're actually going to attach a little piece of the green designer series paper on here. And you'll see that the pattern that I'm looking at is peeking out from the bottom. So this will make sense in just a second. So the way this is going to eventually work is we're going to kind of hold this piece down, and then that is going to tuck up and under. And that's how we're creating our matchbook. Okay. All right. Before we do that, we're going to go ahead and grab our card base. It's just easier to do this now because we don't have a lot of layers going on with the card. And all I'm going to simply do is kind of fold everything together. This is how the card is going to look at the beginning. And what I want to do is I want to adhere the designer series paper piece to the top of my cardstock. And all I'm going to do is take some liquid glue and I am going to put that in the middle. Now, one thing you're going to notice is that the border that the cardstock will show is not going to be the same on the left and right as it is on the top and the bottom. That is intentional. It's intentional because I want to show how wide the border is on the right, and I'm going to highlight that using additional pieces of designer series paper. So I'm purposely not centering my initial piece in the card so that the border is identical on the top and on the side. So I am just going to take this and I'm going to put some liquid glue on the back. There's going to be a very small place where the two pieces of designer series paper meet, and you will not see it when we're all said and done. And because it's the same pattern, it's really not all that visible anyway. I'm making sure that my 1 inch score is on the right, and I'm just going to go ahead and put that on my cardstock. The border on the top and the bottom will be the same distance. The border on the left and the right will be the same distance. But the border all the way around is not going to be the same. And that is intentional. So where we are right now is here. We have cardstock base. We have our designer series paper. And right now it's acting like a trifold. Well, I want it to be more than that. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to adhere my little flap down. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to use some tear and tape. It is just the quickest way to put this piece down. And it definitely, I think, is the best adhesive to do that. I'm orienting this so that my flap for me is going up and down. And the larger piece is also going up and down. And I'm going to take my tear and tape and I am going to put that right up here, right beside that score line. So I'm just going to put a piece of tear and tape, and I don't need to get it all the way over to the edge, but I will try to get it fairly close. And I will just cut that off. And this is a really good width for this. It's going to give a nice area where everything will be pressed down and holding really well, but it also gives enough movement so that you can still bring that flap in and out. And you can tell that that's where the tear and tape is on this card, right here, where that strip of designer series paper is showing. So the tear and tape is right here. And if I go ahead and just fold my flap over and give that a nice press, and then I can lift that up just a tad and run my fingers underneath. You don't want to bend it much at all. You're just giving it a little bit of movement so that paper gets used to bending a little bit backwards. And then I can go ahead and tuck the front flap in, and that's essentially how the card itself is going to work. It's just going to tuck right in there. And what's nice is when I open this card up, because of the way that the paper lines up, it definitely isn't noticeable in terms of being two pieces of paper. No one is going to look at that. And this is just a great way to use up some of your 6x6 designer series paper that I guarantee has been in your stash for quite a bit of time. So once we have this, and this is the basic bones, you can do really whatever you want to with this card. And let's talk about that for 2 seconds. You're not committed at this point to make it vertical, or I'm sorry, horizontal, unless you have a pattern on the inside that is one that is a direction. I could, if I wanted to, I could switch this to portrait, and I could have my matchbook open this way. So you've got choices. I'm going to continue to do this one in the same way that I created this, just because, frankly, I have everything together. I know it works, and that's what I'm going to do. So I want to share with you just a couple of very quick tips and tricks in terms of putting that little bunny together. And as I mentioned, I did use the Easter Bunny stamp set. I did a lot of prepping. I like to use my Stamparatus when I'm coming up with a design that I know I'm going to do multiple times. And you may or may not have noticed, if you have the stamp set, that there is a little bit of masking involved. I mean, take a look. We've got this bunny image here. We've got this flower spray here. And by the time I got him all done, the flower spray is showing in front of the bunny. And I just wanted to show you very, very quickly how I did that. And it's really not mystical or magical. It's actually kind of fun. And I need to just make sure I'm going to get this about in the middle. So that looks like it's pretty good. If you haven't done masking before, the one thing that I will say, which to me, the first time I did it was a little counterintuitive, but it makes perfect sense, is whatever image you want in the front is the image that you stamp first. The logical reason is because that is the one that you really want to see completely as an image. You don't want anything blocked. So if I look back at the way that this is stamped, I don't see the outline of the bunny's head. I see the flowers on the bunny's head. So that means that I need to do my flowers first. So there are my flowers. Might make them a little bit darker. And then I just need to put a mask together. And what I like to do when I'm doing masking is I will use Post-it notes. They're just the absolute easiest thing to do. And I will stamp on a little Post-it note the image that I'm going to mask. There is fussy cutting involved. And when I did the fussy cutting, I ignored these little pieces because they're not going to show in my final design. The way that I have that stamp set up, you can see it doesn't matter. Where I stamped these little pieces here, they're way off of the bunny's head, so it doesn't matter. And these little leaves are also. So that's really nice because that means that my fussy cutting isn't going to be so detailed. And I just fussy cut this piece, which is the flowers and the big leaves. And all I'm going to do here, and I made sure that when I stamped and I fussy cut, that some of the adhesive from my Post-it note is still on that little piece that I cut out. Because now what I want to do is I want to stamp the bunny. And I've also got the sentiment on the same plate. And I'm going to stamp that directly over and on top of that little Post-it note. And that Post-it note is going to block part of the bunny's head from being stamped onto my focal point. And it's just a super, super cool technique. If you've never done masking before, I just encourage you to give it a try. And you'll see on that masking piece that I put on the top, the bunny's head is getting stamped on the green, but it is not going to be going on the petal pink. And we'll just do a little bit more. And enjoy all the little moments. How appropriate is that for so many, many different occasions? And now if I take the mask away, you can see that the flowers look like they are in front of the bunny's head. You can reuse that mask several times. This is one that I use quite a few times. Periodically, flip it over and just make sure that there's no ink that is bleeding through of the bunny's head in this case, because if it is, that will start to show up on your cardstock, and you definitely don't want that. And then the last thing that I'm going to stamp on this little guy, and again, I have this all set up in my Stamparatus, is the butterfly. And the little butterfly is going to be kind of flying away from the bunny's foot, which is just super cute. I guess my message in this is when you see a stamp set like the little Easter bunny and you see all the cute little images, think of ways that you can combine those images into a really pretty focal point. And you will see that the possibilities are pretty endless. And then if you want to have a pattern that you can replicate, your Stamparatus is really going to be incredibly helpful in allowing you to do that. So that's the focal point. And then I used the 5th largest rectangle stitched framelit die to just cut that little bunny out. And that's going to become the focal point for my card. And I do have another one that I had done beforehand. So let's get back now to how we're going to make this card that we started. How we're going to get some more of these little decorative pieces and bring the pattern kind of together. So you will remember when we were cutting out the initial pieces of designer series paper, that there was a piece that you ended up with when you cut your first piece that was 2 inches by 4, 2 inches by 4 inches that you had left. Well, you're going to use the piece that you had left and you're going to take 2 pieces from that. So these are 3/4 of an inch wide and 4 inches long. So if you go back to that piece that you had that started at 2 inches wide, 4 inches long, take that piece and cut off 2 3/4 inch wide pieces. And what we're going to do is we're going to put one of those pieces right on the edge of the part that flips up. So it will end up looking like this. This is a piece that I actually adhered onto that folded edge. And I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on there and add it. I just thought it was kind of fun to bring in both patterns from the designer series paper. And since I intentionally used the petal pink as the background on my bunny, I wanted to make sure that there was some of the mint macaron showing on the front of the card, just to give it a little bit more interest. So I just took some Tombow and I adhered that onto my strip. And now when I tuck that in, we've got a fun beginning of the combination of flowers just by adding that in. And it also does one more thing. This piece is going to get some wear. You know, the more that the front piece is opened and closed, the more wear. It's not going to do it any harm, but the more wear this is going to take. So if I have this now as a double piece of designer series paper, it's going to be a little bit stronger. Well, I've got one more piece from the 4-inch, 2-inch by 4-inch. And again, this is 3/4 of an inch wide. So I thought, well, when I have my card closed, it would look pretty if it was almost symmetrical on either side with the petal pink gingham and then the mint macaron to do the same thing on the other side. So all I did on this is just like for the piece I just adhered, just going to add a little bit of the Tombow. And then I'm going to do my best to make it about as wide on the left side as it is on the right side. And I'm not going to get super hung up about it. And just try to make sure that it is straight. It is going to attach well because it is 4 inches long and my paper is 4 inches long. So it should line up and be really nice and flat. All right. So that's the front. And the only thing missing at this point is the focal point. So if I take out the bunny that is not yet colored, what I'm going to do with the bunny is I'm going to attach that right in the middle. And I intentionally wanted to find an image that was a little bit vertical and would not take up an enormous amount of room, but fit pretty nicely into that space. But you do what you want because this is your card and you have a reason and a purpose and probably a recipient kind of in mind. And you can make this as large or as small as you want. You could put multiple images in here as well. And I really like the gingham because it's helping me visually try to get things kind of straight. All right, I'm just going to turn that over and do a nice burnish with my hand and make sure that everything is lying pretty flat. So let's just compare what we're working on versus the example that I showed. And I'm going to close my blinds because that sun is way too strong. Yeah, that's not being very helpful. We'll do it the other way. There we go. Sorry about that. It had been raining a lot today, so I was not paying attention to the sunlight outside. So when I did my initial card versus this card, and I'm not going to take the time to do this right now, I will just tell you what I did. I used both sets of the watercolor pencils and different colors in the watercolor pencils, and I colored my little bunny. And I really wanted to do some outlining and then also some colors that went well with the petal pink. So that's the finishing of the coloring that I did on the front. Now let's talk about the inside. And let's look at the inside of the finished versus the inside of the card that we are making. And we're going to see some pretty dramatic differences. Obviously, the one we're working on is pretty blank. The one that's done has some nice symmetry. If you look at the card itself, we've got a cute little image, and we're also bringing in some of that petal pink gingham to the inside of the card, just like we brought the mint macaron to the outside of the card. So where are we going to go for that? Well, remember that piece of 4x6 that you started with when we were cutting up the initial 6x6? Even after you've cut off the 2 pieces of mint macaron that are 3/4 of an inch wide, you still have leftovers. So you've still got enough paper to, if you want, make some additional pieces that you can use on the inside. And I know you know this. If you turn that piece over, so we've got one design on one with the mint macaron, we've got the petal pink on the other. You can cut, I cut these at 1/8 of an inch. You can cut them however wide you would like. The reason I cut them 1/8 of an inch was this over here, the petal pink that is showing, is about 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to just kind of leave these off to the side, and I'm going to describe what I did for the sentiment on the inside. I'm not going to repeat this because it's pretty obvious. I used stamps again from the Easter Bunny stamp set. I used this cute little guy who's kind of on the side, his little portrait. And then I put a bird on his ear. And the way I did that, again, was I used my Stamparatus because I knew that I would be recreating this a couple of times. And once I had it set up, it is super, super easy to do multiple times. You can get that little bird so he looks just like he is sitting right on the top of that little guy's head. This is the piece that we started with. This is the 3x4, and this is basic white. And I'm just using the Memento Black ink, just like it did for the other sentiment. If you choose to put a sentiment on the inside, fabulous. If you just want to put a piece of basic white so you can write a greeting, that's fabulous too. I do suggest that you figure out what you're going to do on the inside before you attach these, and let me show you why. So let me bring back the card that we're working on. And here's the piece that I want to put in the middle. I have the ability to center this piece. I'm centering it between where the fold is, and I can see that fold, and where the crease is from the piece that's lifting up. I can do that very easily now. And then I will have the ability to add these 2 pieces on either side of my sentiment or my image. If I put these pieces on, it would not go well because I might not get my color in exactly the right place. So I'm just going to take this little guy and again, use some Tombow. I need to get stock in the company that makes Tombow. I definitely go through it. And it's great when I'm able to get it from Stampin' Up. And Stampin' Up has one of the least expensive prices for Tombow on the market, which is also very nice. So all I'm doing here is I'm looking left and I'm looking right, looking to where that fold is and to where this piece of paper comes up. And I'm trying to get that piece centered. And then I'm going to give that a nice little burnish. And now I can attach the pieces of petal pink right on either side. And it will just give it a nice little border and make it all look kind of cohesive. So I'm going to go ahead and put those on one at a time. And what I'm going to try and do before I do that is I want to see if, I'm looking at this piece over here, I want to see if the pattern matches up better one way than the other. And whatever way it looks better, I'm going to use, because your eyes will be drawn all the way across. And if you can get those patterns to match up as well as you can, don't go crazy if they don't match exactly. It will just make the card look a little bit more cohesive. And if you decide to use a piece that's this thin, you don't need a lot of Tombow at all. Just put kind of a thin line sort of down the middle. You don't want it really goopy. And then you're going to take that piece and just tuck it right next to your piece of basic white. I'm just going to try and make sure I'm getting it all the way up to the top. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. So my reason for putting multiple pieces of designer series paper was twofold. One is I wanted to, like I've already said, put different colors on the outside and the inside and get all the colors that really go well together, showing together. And the other was, frankly, I had leftover paper when I cut my 2 pieces of 6x6. And I thought, well, heck, let's figure out a way to use those. So here's where the card that we're making is. And again, I'm just going to bring in the card that I showed as an example, and we're going to look at the final elements that I added. We're going to pretend that this is colored like this one is with the watercolor pencils. And we're going to pretend that the inside is colored as this one was with the watercolor pencils. I really wanted to make this little guy a bluebird. So I Googled a bluebird picture and I decided to mimic that as best as I could. And frankly, I think he looks like a cute little bluebird. So I was pretty happy with that. All right, so what are the final pieces of bling? Well, we've got a couple things going on. There is a bow, which is actually wrapped around. This is made out of linen thread. And I'll show you how I did that. It's not hard at all. And I think it adds just a little bit of fun. So if you take your linen thread, get a pretty decent size, run it through your fingernails just to get that curl out. And then what I did was I tucked it up underneath where the flap is. So I pulled it really far back, and I'm going to try to get the linen thread to align with the edge of my Mint Macaron designer series paper. And I'm just going to move it a little bit back and forth, almost like dental floss, actually. And that's going to help it scooch into where the tear and tape is just a little bit. And then I'm going to figure out how far I want that thread to be, because I'll end up tying the bow kind of up at the top. And a lady who is on our call, a very dear friend, Brenda, shared an amazing tip about how to tie bows when you have a situation like this. So, you know, you've done this. You come in here and you're trying to tie your bow and you're trying to hold it down and the world is not cooperating. It's just not a happy thing. Well, grab a glue dot. Grab a glue dot and figure out where the knot in your bow is going to be. Put a glue dot where that's going to happen. And then you've got a friend. You've got another pair of hands. Because if you pay attention to where your glue dot is and you tie that little knot, and my glue dot is right there. I bring that knot up to where that glue dot is, and I press that knot into the glue dot, it's going to stick. And now I have the ability to do what I want to do with my bow. It's just brilliant and a really, really easy thing to do. And then I'm not fussing with trying to hold everything down while I'm tying my bow. And I have a much, much better chance of tying a bow that looks half decent. And I'm just going to cut off the tails. And this bow is definitely going to look a little different than the bow that I did on the example, but that's okay. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of bling. Two of my favorite things of bling. These butterflies, the brushed brass butterflies, are so much fun. And they go really well. Since I've got a little butterfly down here, I'm going to kind of mimic what I did on the other card. They come in two sizes, small and large. They're nice and flat. So when you put them into an envelope, they do not add bulk and they are just fun. If you don't have any of these, I suggest that you think about getting some because they add just a very whimsical kind of design. And then I thought my other favorite right now are these champagne rhinestones. They are just fun and gorgeous. And I've used a ton. I don't have any of the big ones, but that's okay. I thought it would be kind of cool to put a rhinestone right on the top of where I tied my knot on my bow. And I did that for two reasons. One is I think it looks kind of fun. And the other one is with that extra adhesive, that's also going to help hold my bow down a little bit. So let me bring back in the example and the card that we just made. And the only real difference is the fact that the images are colored on the example and not colored on the one we just did. But other than that, they work the exact same way. And it's just a very fun card for somebody to get. And I think it would be fun to send these because if somebody got this card, the first thing they're going to do, I think, is look at it and say, this is really cute. How do I get into this? And they might look at it for just a minute and then think, oh, wait a minute. I think I can pull this up. And then they'd open it up and see this really cute surprise on the inside. So I really hope you've enjoyed learning how to make this kind of card. And I really hope you will give it a try. There are infinite possibilities. Switch it up. If you want to do some vertical, just make your pattern go vertical. And I really think you're going to have fun with it. So until next time, inky hugs.